industrial production and manufacturing. Two important parts of the American economy factor into our first report today on CNN 10. I'm Carl Azus, happy to have you watching. According to the U.S. Federal Reserve, the country's central bank, 5.4% is how much America's industrial production dropped in March as factories stopped operating. Manufacturing fell by 6.3% as cutbacks were made in areas like car production, auto parts manufacturing, and furniture making. The last time these numbers decreased by this much in a month, the year was 1946. World War II had just ended. Industries were shutting down their production of war effort materials and transitioning to making consumer products again. 74 years later, it's the coronavirus pandemic that's closed factories. No one knows yet how long it'll take to get industry running the way it was before COVID-19 entered America. According to Johns Hopkins University, more than 2 million coronavirus cases have been confirmed worldwide. Over 610,000 of them are in the United States. And while there's still a lot that doctors don't know about the disease, a new study suggests that people might be most likely to infect others before the carriers even show symptoms themselves. This was published Wednesday in the journal Nature Medicine, but the study relied on patients' memories of when they first started showing symptoms, so it might not be entirely accurate. Still, a growing amount of research indicates that people who feel healthy are helping spread coronavirus, so the U.S. government's recommending that healthy people keep their faces covered whenever they leave the house. 2020 is an election year, not just for the United States, but for numerous countries on every inhabited continent. South Korea is one of them, and it's giving us a sense of how other elections may look in these strange and virulent times.
This is what an election during a pandemic looks like. This is South Korea, the parliamentary elections. And as you are coming into the polling station, you have your temperature taken. You are told that you cannot stand less than 1 meter apart to try and keep some distance. As you come up here, you are given hand sanitizer. Everybody has to sanitize their hands. And then just before you enter into the polling station itself, you are given disposable gloves to put on, and only then you are allowed inside to vote. Now, when it comes to masks, this is South Korea. Everybody is automatically wearing a mask and has been for weeks anyway. Now, this is what we are looking at this point. This is being replicated around the country. There's more than 14,000 polling stations. They will be disinfected throughout the day, we are told. And this is really being seen as a referendum of President Moon Jae-in and his ruling party's dealing with the coronavirus crisis. Now, his approval rating has increased in recent weeks, as has his party's, and there has certainly been some overseas praise for the way that they have dealt with this crisis. But it's interesting because it's almost the voting itself, the fact the election is taking place, that is more important from an international point of view than who wins. The fact that they are able to do this, and there will be countries around the world looking at this to see if they are able to replicate the same. Now, there was some concern that turnout might be low. Maybe people would be too worried about coming to a polling station where other people were. That has clearly not been the case. Friday and Saturday of last week was when early voting took place, and there was a record turnout. Over 26% of the electorate voted early. And the final turnout vote we have seen is the highest in well over 20 years. Paula Hancock's CNN Seoul.
10-second trivia. What or who were Newport, Sopwith, and Spad? Clothing store founders, British battleships, Triple Crown winners, or World War I aircraft? These were all aircraft that flew in the First World War, engaging in the first dogfights of aerial combat. The Sopwith Camel was one of the most famous fighter planes of World War I. And to give you a sense of how dangerous flying was in 1917, the Smithsonian says almost as many pilots died in accidents involving the Sopwith Camel as they did in combat with the machine. Just training to fly back in World War I was incredibly dangerous, and that's before you factor in the threat of other pilots who were trying to shoot you down. But it offered an unparalleled thrill and adventure when flying was new, dogfights were breaking out in the skies over Europe, and those who shot down at least 5 enemy aircraft became the world's first flying aces. So for today's virtual getaway, we're visiting an aerodrome, an old school airport in New York whose runway is a field.
aircraft was a brand new invention in World War I, you know, just 10 years or so after the Wright brothers first flew. At first, I think the armies of Europe didn't really know what to do with the airplane, but it very quickly found a very important role. And aircraft production and training of pilots, they all skyrocketed very quickly.
It was a brand new way of fighting. Having war machines that operated within the air added a third dimension to the battlefield. And they were just learning how to do it. And so pilots were throwing bombs out of the cockpit, and they were carrying pistols and rifles in the cockpit, or they would have an observer in a secondary cockpit who had a pistol or a rifle, and they would be trading rounds with other airplanes.
I have a lot of respect for the young men who flew these really primitive elemental airplanes back in the day, often with only a few weeks of training. So I can imagine being a 17-year-old kid jumping in one of these airplanes and then being thrown into combat versus, you know, another guy who's probably another 17-year-old kid scared out of his mind who's trying to kill him.
I think on the one hand they were terrified because they were young, they were fresh. When they came to the front lines with a unit, you know, they maybe had a maximum of 20 hours of flying time. They just weren't that experienced.
The old Rhinebeck Aerodrome is the only real time machine I've ever seen anywhere in the world. You know, you step across the covered bridge here, it's just like it was back in the day. The machines, you know, the people, the atmosphere, it's all so different from the everyday hustle and bustle. And you know, most people have hundreds of airplanes fly over their heads all day long and they never even look up. But here you can't help but look up.
Everything nowadays is very much electronic. It's very much, you're just a systems manager, you know, flying on an autopilot. And it's not as visceral and it's not as literally in your face. When you're sitting in a SPAD 7 or a Fokker triplane or whatever from the war flying that, it's true wind in your face flying.
Here at Old Rhinebeck, we believe an airplane isn't really an airplane unless it flies. So we will do everything we can to keep them going and, you know, to always fix what little things may go wrong and keep it all in the air.
It's very much living history. It's very much history that you can't get anywhere else because it is in your face. You literally can hear it and see it and smell it all at once. And that's a totally different experience.
Mark Hauser says when he was 19 years old, he decided to overcome his fear of heights by skydiving. And he just became the Guinness World Record holder for performing the first skydive into the jet stream. To do that, he used a hot air balloon to travel more than 4.5 miles up. The high winds and the cold put out the balloon's flame, so it wasn't just about setting the record, it was about making sure his two assistants got back down safely. All of them did. That made finding a firm footing a feat to defeat fear by footing his best foot forward, finding a way to foot the bill, and stepping out where angels fear to tread. What a fine feature. I hope Nakusa High School agrees. It's in Nakusa, Wisconsin. You guys are awesome for subscribing to our YouTube channel. I'm Carl Azus for CNN.